Hello and welcome to IG's podcast series, Trading the Markets. I'm Jeremy Naylor. Coming up, we're going to discuss the difference between recreational and medicinal cannabis, how each is produced, how it's treated in the market, and how it's used. Max Jacobs joins us from Edison Investment Research.
I expect it to continue to grow very well. Eventually getting up to $90 billion in sales in the United States when it's fully legal, and that's a little bit more than a third of the $234 billion in sales that we see with the alcoholic beverage industry.
Also joining us around the table is Josh Warner, journalist covering the sector for us here at IG.
The medicinal market has a lot more certainty around it at the moment, and some estimates have said that it was worth about $12 billion globally in 2018. But most of the larger players see the big ticket item as the recreational market, with some studies showing that it could be worth double the medicinal market by 2024.
To find out more, stay tuned for our podcast series, Trading the Markets. Around the table today to explain the differences between medicinal and recreational uses of cannabis and to discuss how each product is produced, the applications, and how the market views the opportunities is Max Jacobs, Managing Partner and Director of Research for North America at Edison Investment Research, and IG's Josh Warner, who has been covering the sector as interest builds globally for the medicinal use of cannabis derivatives and the recreational consumption that is also now beginning to find a market. Welcome to the podcast. Maxim, I want to start first of all with you. What is cannabis and why is it psychoactive?
Well, cannabis is a plant, and the reason it's psychoactive is it has this ingredient called THC, and THC targets the CB1 receptor, which is expressed in the peripheral and central nervous systems, and it's the part of the cannabis plant that makes you high, and also the part that makes you, want to eat and all that other stuff. There's other ingredients, they're called phytocannabinoids that are in the plant. There's over 100. There's besides THC, there's also CBD, but that's not psychoactive. That has some other, qualities that have made that into kind of a big growth market. But that's kind of a separate item.
So what part of the plant then is used? We're quite often used to seeing pictures of the cannabis leaf. What part does each contribute to medicine and to the psychotic drug?
Well, so, generally the part of the plant that's used is actually not the leaf. The leaf, looks nice, and it's a good symbol for branding, I guess. But it's actually the flower at the top of the plant. That's generally where most of the cannabis is actually coming from. But you can use the leaves or the leaves for, you can get oils and resins out of them. So, you don't have to necessarily throw them away, but it's generally the bud part, the flower part at the top that's used mainly.
Josh, let's bring you in and ask you, how are governments regulating medicinal and also the recreational use of cannabis?
Governments seem to be taking a bit more caution when it comes to the recreational side of things, mostly because the debate around medicinal cannabis is slightly less controversial. So what we've seen in most countries is that they look at the medicinal cannabis market first before they decide whether or not they want to embrace the recreational side of things as well. So in America, for example, we've got 33 states that have legalized medicinal marijuana, but only 11 that have approved recreational use as well. But I think the most important considerations for each side are quite different. So on the medicinal side, people are looking at increased demand and potential health benefits for conditions such as epilepsy, whereas on the recreational side, it's a bit more of a trade-off. On one hand, governments have the chance to control an illegal market, take money out of a black market and possibly raise quite a large amount of tax. But on the other hand, there's obviously concerns about the health implications and also addiction as well.
Max, I want to get back to you if I can and then talk a little bit more about what the medical profession want from this. We've heard from Josh about the government's angle on this. What does the medical profession want and how is it used and produced?
So, in terms of medical cannabis and what it's used for. Generally, across markets, the top use is going to be pain, and we've seen that in Like Germany just released some data on that. We've seen that in the U.S. and in the recreational states, and we've also even seen that with CBD. That pain is generally like number one or number two reason for the use of cannabis. And one of the reasons that the medical community is very interested in that is, it is actually non-addictive. So it's not an addictive painkiller, and it can lead to opioid sparing. And we have a lot of issues with, opioid use in the United States. And there have been studies that have shown that in the states where medical marijuana has been legalized, that opioid use has fallen. I believe it's somewhere around 20%. So it's very, it's very useful in that way, and that's, I think, one of the main reasons people are interested in it. There are some people who believe that it works for just about everything, but there's really very little data to support that. It's really mainly for pain. For CBD, on the other hand, which is a separate product. It's kind of a concentrated oil, generally. It has a lot of use in anxiety because it doesn't have like the psychoactive aspects. It kind of helps calm you down and helps with some pain, and that's what people are interested in that for.
So what is then, Max? What is then the medical profession demanding here? Are they demanding the THC part of this or the CBD part?
I mean, I don't know if the medical profession is necessarily demanding. I think they would just like to, in the appropriate patient, be able to have as wide variety of choice as possible. So they would like to be able to prescribe it, when they can in the appropriate case, because it is, while there are kind of long-term effects neurologically, like otherwise, it's relatively safe, and you can't overdose on it. So I think they just want to have, they just like additional choices. It's not necessarily like, oh, we really want, to have medical cannabis for this particular indication. I think it's just generally we want more choices kind of thing. Because, I mean, in pain, there's, for example, very limited, either you go, there's paracetamol, ibuprofen, which are relatively weak, and then you have like opioids. Probably something in the middle would be nice, and this is something that would be kind of in the middle. Like the pain data that I've seen is never really outstanding. It's like it works moderately well, but that's probably good enough for a lot of people.
Josh, you've done a lot of research around the companies with regard to this particular area. Where do cannabis companies see the opportunity here in the medicinal or indeed the recreational market?
I think right now there's a lot more certainty around the medicinal market. So I think initially you saw a lot of companies start on that, but in truth, most of them are dabbling in both sides. Looking at some reports, the valuations of the market can be quite different. One report suggested that the medicinal market globally was worth about £12 billion in 2018. But I think people should realise that most of the larger players especially see the recreational market as the big ticket item. Again, if you look at sort of estimates at market worth, they all suggest that the recreational market will overtake the medicinal market, in the coming years. One report suggested that it could be worth double the medicinal market by 2024.
Max, what about your view from an analyst point of view on this? How difficult is it to analyse what is on offer at the moment for investors in this particular space?
Well, I mean, the biggest hurdle, of course, is regulation. You're just not quite sure what it's going to look like in 1, 2, 3, or 4 years. Like technically, for example, in the United States, marijuana is still illegal. I mean, yes, it's legal in 11 states, but that's from a state level. On a federal level, it's illegal. So the government could one day just say, we're enforcing federal law, and like the whole industry is shut down. That's not going to happen, but it could happen, and you're always sort of like worried about it a little bit. And then there's also all these other issues that do affect companies, like on a in terms of like taxation and what they can deduct on their taxes. So generally, cannabis companies have, in the U.S. at least, have unusually high tax rates on any income because of they're not allowed to deduct anything that's related to trafficking. And since it's illegal on a federal level, it would be considered trafficking a lot of their expenses that are related to marijuana. So it's a bit of a challenge. Also, another challenge is, there's a lot of different parts of the cannabis industry. There's growers, there's distributors, there's people who have brands, and all of them have very different dynamics. So on the grower side, that's like a race to the bottom. I think a lot of people thought, like, hey, if I just have a big farm, I'm going to get rich quick and all that stuff, but that's actually not what's happening. We have a lot of oversupply, and which is causing prices to fall dramatically. In the state of Oregon, for example, which probably has the loosest licensing laws for growers, they have 6.5 years worth of supply on hand right now. So it's like that part of the business. It's like, I've heard of people being able to buy a kilogram of cannabis for $100 at an auction out west. That's like a dramatically lower than what you're generally seeing. So there's just a lot of oversupply, and some people are going to have like these fire sales because they're going out of business. And so the part of the business that I actually think is most attractive is, or will be most attractive, is the brand names. If you can go with the big brands. So my thesis is kind of like with the internet. There were a lot of online companies that went bankrupt in 2000, 2001 or 2, like the Pets.coms, Webvan, or all these names. But like if you went with Amazon, you actually made a lot of money. So I think the same thing's going to happen here. A lot of these brands are going to go away, and there's going to be some leaders that are just going to get that market share. Problem is, right now it's very early, and we're not quite sure which ones are going to be the ones that really take off.
Josh, from your point of view, which companies are you watching in the space at the moment?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, most of the bigger stocks are dabbling in both, but there are some differences to point out. So on the medicinal side, I think the stock to look out for is GW Pharma. As far as I'm aware, it's one of, if not the only, pure play cannabis drug developer on the market, and it's also got a bit of a niche because it's a UK-based company that predominantly sells into the US, whereas most of the other larger players are mostly from Canada or from the US as well. So on the medicinal side, I'd say GW Pharma. On the recreational side of things, again, you've got your big three, which often get cited, which are Canopy Growth, Tilray, and Aurora, and all of them generate revenue from medicinal and recreational, albeit to varying degrees. So Canopy, in its last quarterly statement, made about 3 times as much revenue from the recreational market compared to the medicinal market, whereas Aurora's latest results presented a bit more of an even sales mix.
Max, just one final point from you. Where do you see this market in, let's say, a year or two's time? Because clearly there's a lot going on in this sector at the moment. Josh mentioned a couple of companies there, and you made the good point that we don't know yet how things are going to roll out on the regulation side. How do your best guess for the next year or two, how do you see the sector developing?
Well, I still expect there to be, I think there's going to be high growth. This is going to be a very large industry. I think, for example, in the U.S., when eventually it's going to be fully legal, I believe, I think it's going to be a $90 billion market in terms of sales every year,
how does that
which is still like about a...
How does that compare with the likes of the tobacco market, for example?
Oh, I haven't looked at versus tobacco, but it's about like a third of the size of the alcohol market.
Right, okay. That puts it into some sort of perspective. Okay. And how long is it going to take to get there? Because clearly this is a market which is already growing. Has it got much of that growth to that sort of level still to come, do you think, or are we almost there?
No, it still has a lot more growth to come. It's really relies on the large states to make things fully legal. Like, when New York, New Jersey, Florida, and all these other big states, start coming online, that's when you'll see the growth. So it's still a long, long way to go, but we can get to full legalization relatively quickly. It really depends on next year's election. Many of the Democrats have signed on for legalization, and Bernie Sanders just released a plan that he wants to have full legalization and also expunging of people's records if they were convicted of any marijuana-related violations in the past. So it depends, but it seems like the momentum's there, and eventually we will get there. But in a year or two, in terms of like the actual stocks, I expect more of a shakeout. We've seen that with kind of cannabis stocks in general. There was a lot of, there was a lot of basis to the hype, but there was still a lot of hype. Some of the valuations were kind of outrageous, and people weren't really thinking about, okay, well, when Canada legalizes, how long will it take for retail stores to come online? How long will it take for concentrates to be legalized? All that other stuff, and so that's obviously hurt the likes of Tilray. And a lot of the other companies who might not have known what they were doing, like maybe they're just focused on growing. I don't think they're going to do very well.
Yeah. Okay, look, we'll leave it there. But thank you both for joining us there for IG's podcast series, Trading the Markets. You've been listening there to Maxim Jacobs, Managing Partner and Director of Research for North America at Edison Investment Research, and IG's Josh Warner, who's been covering the cannabis sector for us as interest builds globally for the sector.